All right, let's go back to createentry.js. So here again is our where we've specified the event listener for clicking on that submit button. And we just updated it to grab the actual habit of mind from the radio buttons. But all we're doing right now is just logging that data. We want to do, that's not particularly useful. We want to actually get the data to the web application. So we're going to change this. We're not going to log. Instead, we're going to build up the data, the entry, our journal entry that we want to send back to the server. So I'm going to replace this console.log with a new variable called entry. And I'm going to build a little object here. It's going to have a property called date with a value of date. We got that already up above here. It's going to have a property called habit with a value of habit of mind, which is the code we just wrote. And it's going to have a property called content with a value of content, which we grabbed right here. So we create this variable entry. And so now we are going to actually send the data to the server. And this is how we do that. We're going to create a variable called response, which is the response we're going to get from the server after we send the HTTP post request. We'll get back a response. We'll know if it works or not. Doing an HTTP request is an asynchronous operation. Takes some time. We don't want everything to block. So as we saw earlier when we were doing our database calls, we need to do this asynchronously. So we're going to invoke the fetch method here in a moment, but the fetch method returns a promise. So we're going to put in a wait in front of it because we want to wait for the promise to be resolved before our code keeps going. So we're going to wait for the promise returned from fetch to be resolved. And with the fetch method, we specify the endpoint, which is create entry. This is the same endpoint we navigated to, okay? And this is not uncommon. Very often, we'll go to an endpoint with an HTTP GET request to get the page. And then when we submit our data, we're going to the same endpoint, but we're now doing a POST request to send it the data. So when we do a fetch, we specify an endpoint, and then we specify an object with a variety of properties that are needed for the fetch. We need to specify the HTTP method, and that is post. We're sending data to be posted on the server. We need to specify headers. This is annoying that it keeps popping stuff up and making it hard for you all to see. There we go. So there's method post. There's our headers. Headers is itself an object. One property is called content type. The content type that we're going to be sending is application JSON. This is part of the HTTP specification. We're sending it a JSON object formatted in, or data formatted in JSON. So we need to actually tell our web application, the server, hey, we're sending you JSON stuff. Other properties that we're going to have that we pass with our fetch method. Let's see, we did headers. We need the body. The body is the actual data we're sending. Here's another, man, I'm really actually liking the JavaScript stuff today. There is a method on the JSON class called stringify. What stringify does is you pass a JavaScript object entry from up here. It turns it into JSON for us. We don't have to do any of this. It's so easy to turn objects into JSON and JSON into objects. It's great. Yeah, both ways, which is super cool. So there we go. Notice that await has an error. It says we cannot use the keyword await outside of an async function, and that is true. So we need to go back up to where we specify this function, which we're doing with the arrow operator up here. And we need to specify that this function is asynchronous. And we do that with that async keyword, just like we wrote previously with some of our database code. So we add the async word up here before the pair of parentheses. And that says this function that we're defining here is asynchronous. And now it's happy, mostly happy. All right. Oh, this is what I believe Connor was talking about earlier, which is there is a shorthand for specifying properties that have the same values. And so I'm getting this warning here from our linter saying, hey, if your value and property are the same name, you can just specify just the variable. See that? Am I correct? Is that what you were referring to earlier? So I can do the quick fix thing here, and I can use object shorthand. And so here I'm using two different variables. The variable value is different than the property name, so I have to be explicit. But here it will create a property called date with a value of date. Cool. I forgot that was even a thing. All right. Let's deal with the response. When we fetch something from the server, it might work or we might get back an error. So we just have to be responsive to that and deal with that. The way we do that is we can say if response.OK, so if the OK property of the response object is true, then we'll just go back to the home page. So I'm going to cut and paste this up here. Else, let's just log a message for now. Console.log, error creating entry. And we might need something more sophisticated, but this works for now. I feel like I've forgotten something. There we go, closing bracket. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to go back to Chrome. I'm going to refresh this page. I will specify a date and a habit of mind, and I'll hit submit and error creating entry. Okay, so it didn't work. All right. And if I switch back to VS Code and scroll down here, I guess I don't get anything more there. That's okay. But it didn't work. Error creating entry. So we have to figure out why, right? A couple different things. One is we need to create a new route. So let's actually take a look at that. And you might be thinking like, I'm pretty sure we already created the route. But we created a route for an HTTP GET command, not an HTTP POST command. So if we go back to router.js, when it says route.get, this is associating this method with an HTTP GET request for this endpoint. Okay, we need to add in a route.post for the same entry point, same endpoint, create entry. But we need to specify a different method. We're going to make this asynchronous as well. And it's going to look the same way with parameters for request and response. And we're going to do another arrow function. And we're going to extract that object from the body of the request. Now, we sent that data as JSON, but when we say rec.body, we're going to get it back as a JavaScript object, which is like, that's not true. We're going to convert it later. But that's okay. We're just going to log it for now. One step at a time. I was getting ahead of myself. So let's just log it so we can see it. And then we are going to return a status of 201, which means, yep, we got it. Data's good. All is well with the world. So grab the data from the body of the request, log it for now, respond with a status of 201, which will go back to the client. So now if we go to Chrome and we refresh the page and we choose a habit of mind and a date, we're back on the home page. We navigated to it. That looks pretty good. Let's see what we actually logged. What we logged was undefined. Okay. That's not the data we sent, right? We should see our whole entry. What we forgot to do has caused me more lost time than anything else writing web apps. So I wanted to actually show this to you, like why didn't the data make it? Because we sent JSON data back to the node server, and it doesn't, unless we tell it to expect JSON, it doesn't know what to do with that. So we need to actually tell it that. Yeah, where's it? Yeah, that's the HTTP like property thing. But we need to tell our Express web app to expect JSON. And so the way we need to do this is we need to go all the way back to our server.js file where we've told it all sorts of good things here, like our view engine and things, and like all the static assets. But we need to do another piece of middleware. So we need to do app.use and tell it, hey, insert this JSON middleware stuff with Express. So we are adding middleware to handle JSON in HTTP request bodies. This is used with the post commands. I forget this line of code all the time, and I get really confused as why my app isn't working. Okay. And it's hard to debug because you just get that it's undefined. It would be great. But like maybe not every Express app needs JSON. I don't know. But now that we have this, if we now go back to Chrome and click Create Entry and choose a date and choose a habit of mind and hit Submit and go back to our server, we can actually now see here is the data being displayed on the console. Here's the date I selected, the habit of mind, and the content.